In this video, we'll talk about factorial designs. In experimental designs, I tend to keep things as simple as possible. The simplest type of design is one that has one dependent variable and one independent variable. So we might study the effects of encoding duration on memory performance. Here we would show participants a list of words. Half the words would be presented for only 500 milliseconds, and the other half of the words would be presented for 3 whole seconds. Then we would measure the proportion of words people could remember or they were able to recall. In this hypothetical experiment, we can see from this bar graph that the long encoding duration condition led to better memory recall. Well, we can have designs with more than one independent variable, however. Factorial designs are experiments that include more than one variable. Each level of one independent variable is combined with each level of another independent variable to produce all the possible combinations between. So adding on to our previous example, we could still have a long and short duration condition, but now we could add another variable like repetition. So words could be presented only once, or they could be shown twice. And our dependent variable would still be memory performance. Here's what the bar graph could look like for this. We would have a total combination of 4 groups here. We would have words presented once for a short duration, words presented twice for a short duration, words presented once for a long duration, and words presented twice with a long duration. So the first 2 bars on the left here are the short condition, and the 2 bars on the right are the long condition. Some terminology to keep straight here. Independent variables are also known as factors. So if we had an experiment with just the one factor of encoding duration, this is known as a one-factor design. If we had our 2 factors in the experiment, both encoding duration and item repetition, this would be referred to as a 2-factor design. And in our experiment here, each of our 2 factors has 2 levels. Duration is long and short, and repetition is presenting the item once or twice. We use a type of shorthand when describing these experiments. We list the number of factors in the experiment separated by an X. So factor A by factor B. And then we note the number of levels in each factor by putting that number where the corresponding factor would be. So in our experiment, it would be a 2 by 2 factorial design. We know here that there are 2 factors because there are two numbers listed, and we know that the first factor has 2 levels, and we also know that the second factor has 2 levels. So short and long by presenting it once or twice. We can add different levels to our experiments, and that would change the description of it. So instead presenting items only once or twice, we could add a 3rd level, repeating it once, twice, or 3 times. Now, in this case, we still have 2 factors, but the second factor now has 3 levels, not 2. And our description of this would change. It would now be a 2 by 3 factorial design. We can also add more factors to our experiment. So in addition to our 2 factors, maybe we also want to examine how these interactions change if you are young or old. So now we would have a 2 duration short long by 3 repetition 1, 2, 3 by 2 age young or old. We can see here that designs can start to become pretty complicated as we add more levels and more factors to our experiment, and this can make results hard to interpret. We can also have factorial designs that are measured both between subjects or a combination of between and within subjects. In a between subjects factorial design, all factors are measured between subjects. So we have 30 separate people in the short one condition, 30 separate people in the short twice, 30 in the long once, and 30 in the long twice condition. In a mixed design, one factor is measured between subjects, and another factor is measured within subjects. So here you would have 30 subjects in the short duration, but those 30 people do both the repeating once and twice conditions, And then you have another 30 people in the long condition who also does the repeating once and twice conditions. So for interpreting results, we look for a few things. We look for main effects, which is looking at the effects of one independent variable without taking the other factor into account. You can have interactions between factors where you have differences between specific levels of one IV and a level of another IV. And then after we know there's a potential interaction present, we look at simple effects where we statistically test all combinations so we know exactly where the differences between levels of each combination are. Here we see a graph of our two-factor experiment. In this graph, we have two main effects. We have a main effect of encoding duration. Generally, the two bars on the right are bigger than the two bars on the left, not really paying attention to or averaging over both repetition levels. We also have a repetition main effect. So ignoring the encoding duration factor, we can see that generally the blue bars are higher than the pink bars. Importantly, from this graph, we can see that there is no interaction. I find it helpful to imagine drawing lines on the graphs. So if we draw two lines connecting both the pink and the blue bars, we can see that they are parallel and they do not cross each other. In other words, the difference between the two sets of blue and pink bars are about the same no matter if it's the short or long condition. Now this bar graph does show an interaction, and you can tell because if you were to draw these same lines as I have here between both blue and pink bars, now they cross over, or they touch, or they interact. This indicates an interaction. Another way to look at it would be that the difference between repeating once and twice in the short condition is a lot bigger than the difference between repeating once and twice in the long condition. There's a big difference between those left two bars, and there's no difference between the right two bars. We call this type of interaction a spreading interaction. This graph shows what we call a crossover interaction. So if we draw the lines, we do see that they cross each other, but the difference between the two sets of bars appear to be the same. So what makes this a crossover interaction is that on the left side, the pink bar is higher, whereas on the right side, the blue bar is higher. So the levels of the factor do differ, but the direction of them is totally opposite across the other factor. So again, the first interaction example is a spreading interaction and is when one level of the IV has an effect on another factor and the other level of the IV pretty much remains the same. And a crossover interaction is like that second example when an IV has an effect on both levels of the other IV but in opposite directions. So now I want to go over a few examples to give you all some practice at looking at graphs and being able to interpret them. So in this example, we have two factors, each with two levels. The first factor is the type of study environment, either studying in quiet or with music. The second factor is whether you eat snacks or not while you study, and here we're measuring performance on an exam. From this, we can see that there is a main effect of study environment. So generally, studying in quiet leads to better performance than studying with music. There is no main effect of snacking, so there's no difference here between those two sets of bars. And importantly, there's also no interaction present here. Our imaginary lines here, if we were to draw them, would be parallel and would not cross over. Next, we have the effects of medication dose, either getting it or not, and the use of therapy, either having therapy or not, and we're measuring depression scores. Here we have a main effect of medication. So the two no medication conditions generally have higher scores than the two medication conditions. We also have a main effect of therapy. No therapy in the red bars are higher than the therapy blue bars. And here we do have an interaction. If you draw those two imaginary lines, you would see that they are not parallel and that they would cross over. The difference between therapy and no therapy seems to be smaller in the no medication condition, and the difference looks to be larger in the medication condition. Another example, we have the effects of supplements and hypnosis on memory. The blue bars here are all even, so this would indicate that there are no main effects at all, and the red bars are all even as well, and there's no interaction here. So basically, there's no differences anywhere here. So no main effect of supplement, no main effect of hypnosis, and no interaction between. Next example, here we have two factors, one being where you study on land or underwater, and then where you take the test on land or underwater. And here we are measuring memory performance, or the number of words recalled. This one is kind of tricky. There are no main effects at all. So if you were to take the left two bars and average them together and compare them to the right two bars averaged together, they would be the same height, so no difference. Also, if you took the blue bars averaged together against the red bars averaged together, there would also be no difference between them. They would be the same height. But there is an interaction here. There's a crossover interaction. So the difference between the bars are the same, but the direction of it is flipped. So if you were to draw those imaginary lines, you would see them cross over. On the left, we have the blue bar that's higher, and on the right, it's the red bar that's higher. Okay, one more example. Here we have type of exercise and the time of exercise on someone's reported mood. Here we have a main effect on the type of exercise. So the blue cardio bars are higher than the red strength bars. But we don't have a main effect of the time of exercise. The two left bars are the same heights as the two right bars. And we have no interaction here. The difference and the direction of the difference remains the same across sets of bars, and our imaginary lines between bars would be parallel and would not cross over. It is entirely possible to have interactions between experiments that have more than two factors, that have three factors. In those designs, you still look for main effects and you still look for interactions. And a three-way interaction is generally interpreted as a 2x2 interaction that is different than another interaction. This graph is definitely kind of crazy. It's hard to understand what's going on here. So I have our lines drawn again. This three-way is different because while the direction between the two blue bars are generally the same, the direction of the red bars are different. On the left side, the red bars are increasing, whereas on the right side, the red bars are decreasing. Three-way interactions are definitely popular, and I see them in research all the time, but my general advice is to try and avoid them if at all possible. Keeping to simple designs is helpful because it helps to interpret the results among other things. Okay, so that's it on factorial designs. Make sure you read the chapter associated with factorial designs in the book. Just a quick note, I still want you to read the chapter on single subject research, and you should be aware of the terms, the definitions, and the concepts from that chapter, but we won't be going over that here in these videos. Okay, see you next time.